we can make sure we have your last name correct. Um, let's see, who have we got next? We got to get to the speaker, but James is going to come and give you a couple announcements. I think he has an email that we received from Joanne, and then we're going to ask him if he would come up and introduce our speaker. Remember, you have cards on the table to ask questions. And what happens at 1 o'clock, we will cut the questions off. If we have more questions than we have time, we would ask the speaker, who would be back at his table, to answer those questions individually for you. Okay? James?
Perfect. Thank you, Ernie. Good morning, guys. It's good to see everybody this morning. Good to see all of y'all here. I'm going to be real quick with these announcements, so track with me. Tomorrow morning, we have Chris Ann Hall coming in to do a constitutional workshop. I'm sure you've gotten plenty of emails about that. We still have room for that. It's $20 a person. If you're a student, it's $10. That includes your lunch, and it'll be 9:30 to 4:30 tomorrow morning. So we'll be right back in here tomorrow. Looking forward to that. That's going to be a great time here. If you're planning on coming, bring a friend, bring somebody who hasn't been to anything like this before. I mean, somebody maybe who doesn't even know what the Constitution says. It's going to be a great time here, so we're looking forward to that. Our next meeting, our next Friday meeting is going to be Mike Lee, not the Senator Mike Lee, but Mike Lee will be speaking on American exceptionalism and why we should keep it. Guys, we have an exceptional nation. As a friend of mine likes to say, second place is a long way off from America. And we have some things we need to work on, but we've got some exceptional things here. Looking forward to that. I have an update, just an email that Joanne sent me this morning, asked me to read to you guys real quick, just kind of updating y'all on where she's at. Somebody read through this, and then we'll pass it off to Ashton, and he can introduce our speaker, and we'll get into today's topic. It says she has a couple different bullet points here. One is border security. Last Sunday, she had a statewide conference call that was widely successful with 141 group leaders and activists on the call for our briefing on state funding for border security. Texas National Guard has already been drawn down to 200 from a high of 1,000 after only being on the border for a few months. With a wide open border and a heightened threat of terror attacks, Joanne stressed that now is not the time to slow down, but to step up state border security. She stressed that she believes the governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general are working in conjunction with a small group of legislatures to construct a new border security plan. We must have trying to read off my phone an email I got a few minutes ago. It's always a chore, isn't it? We must have a placeholder in the budget to fund this. The problem is in the House with Speaker Joe Strauss. We can guess that, right? His appropriations chairman, Republican John Otto, and the border funding subcommittee chaired by Democrat Sylvester Turner. All three have been publicly critical and in opposition to border funding. Joanne therefore stressed the need to immediately start calling these Texas House Committee appropriations, Ways and Means, Homeland Security, Public Safety Select Committees on emerging issues in law enforcement and Select Committee on the state and federal powers and responsibility. The message was simple. We support continuing funding of DPS operation, strong safety, and the Texas National Guard to secure the dangerous, wide-open border. It is a matter of national security. We support the call for continued border funding from the governor and lieutenant governor, and we will watch how your committee votes. She talks about how hundreds of calls have poured in on that, and that we need to continue to push in that area. Joanne has a meeting with the governor on Tuesday to discuss border security, so she asked for your prayers there. She talked about her work with the Lieutenant Governor's Advisory Board, which Ernie mentioned there that she's the chair of. She says is making good progress. Our goal is to get the Senate bills passed on to Lieutenant Governor Patrick's priority for border security, property and business tax reform, Second Amendment bills, which we've heard a lot about, education reform, transportation reform, and pro-life and pro-family legislation, including American laws for American courts. We want the Senate bills stacked up like a cord of wood on Joe Strauss's door, is the way she puts it. She does also ask for your prayers for her efforts, and she appreciates all you guys and your support. So continue to pray for Joanne. I know we spent a lot of time talking about that. With that, I'm going to wrap it up, turn it over to Ashton. Ashton, if you'll come up and introduce our speaker. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Well, today we have an excellent speaker. He's been here before. Mike Connelly. He's a constitutional attorney and the executive director of the United States Justice Foundation. He's a U.S. Army veteran. He got his JD from Louisiana State University, and he specializes in constitutional law. He's handled constitutional issues and most of the amendments, the first 10 amendments. And he's also an author. He's written 4 books, which are going to be back there by the table, which I look at. He writes a blog. He also has a weekly radio show on the internet called Our Constitution, where you can find out what the Constitution really means, and you should also come to tomorrow's learning to find that out. Anyhow, he's extremely well qualified and expert in this, and one of the better known constitutional attorneys in the United States. I'd like you to welcome Mike Connelly.
Thank you for having me again. This is, I think, my 3rd time here. You'll notice I never wear a tie. That's because when I stopped practicing law, I'm still licensed. I still do a lot of appellate work, but I don't have to wear a tie. It's right brief. And I threw away most of my ties, except for 2 of them. And I kept 2 of them particularly because I used them to irritate judges. There was a state district court judge in Baton Rouge who specialized in beating up on young attorneys. And when I was a young attorney, I didn't get intimidated by him, and that just irritated him no end. Years later, my wife and I started taking our children to Disney World on a regular basis, and it was always around Father's Day was when our week was, and they bought me Mickey Mouse stuff. Mickey Mouse shorts, Mickey Mouse bathing suit, Mickey Mouse socks, Mickey Mouse ties. Well, I started, every time I would go to Judge Bill Brown's courtroom, I would wear a Mickey Mouse tie, because that's sort of how I looked at his court, as a Mickey Mouse court. And everybody in the courthouse knew when I walked in the courthouse, they all looked to see what my tie was, because they knew if I had Mickey Mouse on it, I was going to Bill Brown's court. Then I had another tie I would wear at federal court in front of a particular judge. He and I did not get along very well. Of course, I never got along very well with anybody in the federal government particularly, and because I was always pushing the Constitution. And he, long before it was politically correct, decided that of the 6 flags that flew over the federal courthouse in Baton Rouge, one of them was a Confederate battle flag, and it had to be removed. So he had it taken down. So I got a tie one of my sons gave me for Christmas with a Confederate battle flag on it. And I wore that every time I went to his courtroom. Now that was one way I irritated him. Another way I irritated him was to use a magic phrase. And he would just go ballistic whenever I used it. And that phrase was jury nullification. Federal judges, state judges do not like that phrase. They claim it doesn't exist, that it's not in the Constitution. I got news for you. That's what the Constitution was all about. Read it and read the Declaration of Independence. And you'll see that the jury system was set up specifically because people were being tried by the Crown under false pretexts, no laws used or laws made up as they went along, and no jury. They weren't having their guilt or innocence decided by their peers. In fact, a lot of times they were taken over across the ocean to be tried. So they knew what they were doing. And Madison talks about jury nullification. A lot of our founding fathers in some of their papers talk about jury nullification. That's what the jury system was all about. Yet you will not find it, unless you watch old Law and Orders on TV, you're not going to hear anybody talk about jury nullification, particularly not in the courtroom. I have friends of mine who have been held in contempt of court and actually thrown in jail for even mentioning the words in closing arguments to a jury. But it's there, and it's something that we have to start using more often, because we're going to have more and more people being tried in this country for doing absolutely nothing but supporting the Constitution. And it's going to get worse, and it's going to continue to get worse. We at the United States Justice Foundation do a lot of work on the Second Amendment, First Amendment, and particularly the Fourth Amendment. Because right now we have Big Brother looking at us from every angle. I figure on the Department of Homeland Security list of potential domestic terrorists, I fall into virtually every category. I'm a veteran, and we're on the top of the list. I believe in the Second Amendment. I believe in the right to life. I believe in the Constitution. I'm a strong supporter of the Bill of Rights. And by the way, if you've ever said that, you're on the list. So I figure I'm on their list completely. And we have a ranch out in Canton we bought now, and a small ranch, and my neighbor and I expecting drones to be over my head any time. And we've already set up a little place on the patio where we can sit there and shoot at them. So, but you know, this is something that's going to be happening in this country. The Fourth Amendment is being thrown out completely. The Fifth Amendment, due process, is being thrown out completely. Last time I was here, and I'll touch on this towards the closing of my remarks, but I talked about the veteran situation and how they're being denied their Second Amendment rights and their Fifth Amendment rights. We're making some headway on that. We're starting to win some individual cases. I've got a plaintiff here in Texas. In fact, he's right there in Canton. I'm going to be with him Tuesday, and we're going to be going forward with some stuff. Excuse me. I've done about 10 radio shows so far this week, so if my voice gives out and I start sounding like Donald Duck, just bear with me. But jury nullification is there. But you know, there's another aspect of nullification that is specifically in the Declaration of Independence. And that is basically the nullification by the people. In the Declaration of Independence, they talk a lot, Thomas Jefferson talks a lot about the reasons that the colonies, the states are seeking independence from Great Britain. And he starts putting out a laundry list of things that they are doing. And he said that when a government starts doing this to the people, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish that government. That's what it says in the Declaration of Independence. And by the way, I've got this little booklet that I've written that a lot of you already bought copies of. It's on the Constitution. It's called Our Constitution. And it takes every article and every section, each amendment of the Constitution, put them in the way they were originally written, and then put in what they mean. I'm working now, I'm going to decide to write another little booklet on the Declaration of Independence, because I frankly hadn't read it in its entirety for a while. And I read it in its entirety before I was preparing for this speech today. And when you look at that laundry list, excuse me, of things that the Crown was doing to the colonists, to the American people, you look at what the reasons they cited for abolishing their relationship with Great Britain, and you can translate most of it into what's happening right here in the United States today. The President of the United States is doing some of the same things, a lot of the same things. Taxing us without consent of Congress, without our consent. Abolishing the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution. Abolishing the Second Amendment to the Constitution. So I'm going to take each one of those and I'm going to put them in the little booklet, or maybe it'll just be an article in my blog, it depends on how long it is. But we'll put them in there and I'm going to point out what's happening now as compared to what was happening then. Under the Ninth Amendment to the Constitution, all rights not designated, or all powers not designated as part of the powers given to the federal government, and they're very limited. That's what I point out in this little booklet. They're very, very limited. They were designed to be limited. They've grown substantially, but in an unconstitutional way. Oh, thank you. The powers are limited both in Article 1 and Article 2 and Article 3. Article 1 sets up the Congress. Article 1, Section 8 says what the Congress can do, what laws it can pass, what areas it can cover. Healthcare is not in there. I pointed that out when I read the first version of the healthcare bill in 2009, all 1,100 pages, and wrote about it. And that's what really started my blog. So there, right there on its face, they're doing things that are unconstitutional. One of the things that is specifically given to Congress as a power is control of naturalization and immigration. Nowhere does it say the president can do that. Article 2, Section 3 of the Constitution says the president must take care to see that laws passed by Congress are enforced. It doesn't say he can make new laws. It doesn't say he can change laws. It doesn't say he can stop enforcing laws. That's what he's done on immigration. Excuse me. I want to take up this gentleman's offer and take one of these cough drops. All right, let's try that again. But the President of the United States basically is violating his oath of office when he does something like refuse to enforce the immigration laws. His oath is basically the same one I took in the military to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. When he decides not to do that, he's committing an impeachable act. Excuse me again. I've written about that in my blog. I've actually given formal articles of impeachment to members of Congress, and they are now being considered by the House Judiciary Committee. So we need to contact members of Congress and tell them to vote those out on the House floor. It only takes a majority to pass articles of impeachment. Then there has to be a trial in the Senate, and 2/3 majority has to vote to convict. That probably won't happen in the current Senate, but the reason we're pushing them with the United States Justice Foundation, and I'm pushing them personally, is because once they're adopted by the House of Representatives, the House will then appoint people, prosecutors, special prosecutors will have extraordinary subpoena powers. They can go after the things that the president is trying to hide. They can interview and depose the people that were in Benghazi. They can cut through the red tape and get the documents for Fast and Furious, which, by the way, Eric Holder was ordered to turn over by a federal court 2 months ago and still refuses to do it. I mean, we have a lawless administration here, and more of the laws that are being passed by Congress are being ignored by the president. Congress passes some bad laws. They have been for years. But the president is doing it, enforcing those laws in ways that the Congress did not intend. Talk about the Second Amendment rights of veterans. Now they're coming after everybody. Yep. New BATF regulations, which we're fighting. New HHS regulations that we're fighting. The latest outrage is a new executive order and the EPA coming out and saying that they're going to ban AR-15 bullets, the most common ammunition. They're going to ban the manufacture of that, those in this country. Why? Because they say they're armor piercing. They're not. They've been tested. They're not armor piercing. But he's having the EPA ban them. He's doing it by executive order. Unconstitutional. So what can we do about it? Nullification. Do what we have the right to do under the Declaration of Independence and under the Constitution. The states need to stand up and say, no, we're not going to allow this to go on. There are county sheriffs that are already standing up. One of them here in Texas that I met recently at a meeting in Las Vegas. There's a group called the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. It's run by Richard Mack. Richard Mack was a sheriff in Arizona back during the Clinton administration. And he sued the federal government. 6 other sheriffs joined in with him because that was when the Brady Bill was passed. And they wanted people to have the background checks before they could purchase a firearm. He said, not in my county, you don't, because they told him he had to do it. He was mandated by the federal government that local county sheriffs had to do the background checks. He refused. He said it violated his oath of office to protect and defend the Constitution. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and guess what? The Supreme Court ruled in his favor. The Supreme Court has said that officers of the courts of this country, elected officials in this country, anybody who takes that oath cannot be forced to violate it. So the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association was set up by Sheriff Mack, and I'm one of their legal advisors, and they drew up a declaration which they're asking anybody can sign. You don't have to be a law enforcement, and you can find the declaration by going to my website, and my cards are back there on the table with the books, and you can go to my website. And by the way, there's a sign-up sheet if you want me to put you on the mailing list so that you'll be notified anytime I write a new article on my blog and post it. It's easy to sign up. Just give me your name and email address, and that list goes nowhere else. I don't do forwards. That's all you'll get from me. But there's an article on my blog called A Line in the Sand that I wrote right after this meeting where they drew up this declaration. Because basically what the declaration says is that we as sheriffs, and they specifically mention gun control, the Second Amendment, we as sheriffs will not enforce any gun control laws passed by the federal government in our county. And further, this is where they really stick their neck out, we won't allow the federal government to come in and enforce it. Now that is nullification. And that is something they have an absolute right to do. And the states have the same right under the 10th Amendment to the Constitution. 10th Amendment says that, if it's not mentioned in the Constitution as a power belonging to the federal government, it belongs to the states, it belongs to the people. That's what the 9th and 10th Amendment are all about. As far as I'm concerned, I have a strict construction of the Bill of Rights. Because in my little booklet, you'll find something that you most don't see in most history books, or where they put in the Bill of Rights or the entire Constitution. And that's the preamble to the Bill of Rights. Not just the preamble to the Constitution. I had to memorize that when I was in school. But this is a preamble to the Bill of Rights. And basically, if you look at that, it is a warning to the federal government issued by the Founding Fathers saying, okay, you know what you can do now, but you can't mess with this Bill of Rights. Because these are God-given rights. They are not given to us by the federal government, and therefore the federal government cannot take them away. Amen. Now, the illustrious governor of New York says that's not true. Well, he claims he personally gives people rights and can take them away. He'll make a good Democratic candidate for president, I think. But that's not the fact of the matter. The fact is that as far as I'm concerned, and Mark Levine, and I agree on, not on everything, but I do agree with Mark Levine when he says Congress should not even be voting on anything to do with changing the Second Amendment. All the gun control legislation passed by Congress, as far as I'm concerned, is null and void. And that's where nullification comes in. State legislatures can come in and say, we are not going to allow registration of firearms in our states. We are not going to allow background checks to be enforced in our states. They have the right to do this. Now, obviously, you're talking about verging on civil war here. That probably is coming anyway, unless the states can stand up for us. Because eventually it's going to get to the point where the people are going to look at this Declaration of Independence and say, you know what? We got to do it all over again. We have a right to do it all over again under the Declaration, and we're going to do it all over again. Because we're being set up right now. As a former military intelligence officer, I belong to a group that meets about once every 2 months. And we have former CIA, FBI, military intelligence, Navy SEALs, Green Berets, Secret Service, and we're all retired from that. We get briefings, intelligence briefings. And we not supposed to talk about outside the room what we hear, but I can tell you it's very scary. And the idiocy that's been going on for the last 3 days, this summit on terrorism or extremism, you know, I forced myself to listen to the President of the United States and what he has to say. And what he had to say was basically, apologize for the people that are out there trying to kill us. Apologize for them and apologize to them for us. We're facing severe consequences as far as terrorism in this country. We're not getting hit hard right now, but I think it's going to come. And when it does, my fear is that the president will use that to impose martial law. And that's where this nullification comes in again. The states can say, not in our state. The state of Texas says, we're not going to impose martial law. We're not going to let you come in here and impose martial law. It's tantamount to seceding from the Union. But that may be what we have to do. Because if martial law is successfully imposed, it will never be lifted. We will never have another free election. Our guns will be taken away. I saw this in New Orleans. I grew up in Baton Rouge and spent quite a bit of time in New Orleans. Right after Hurricane Katrina, when they went in and they kicked down doors and they took people's weapons away. At a very time when crime was rampant, when the looters were all over the place, and people that had their homes secured were fearing for their homes, the feds went in there with local authorities and kicked down doors and confiscated weapons. And they weren't going to give them back. So guess what? The United States Justice Foundation joined a lawsuit, and we won. And we got all the weapons back for people, and it was declared unconstitutional what they had done. So that's another nullification. We can try to do it by the courts. Right now, what happened here in Texas a couple of days ago, when a federal judge threw out the amnesty plan of Obama's. That is a landmark. Here's the key. It has to be upheld in the Fifth Circuit, and we'll be filing an amicus brief in the Fifth Circuit and the Supreme Court, because it's going to go to the Supreme Court. It has to be upheld by the Fifth Circuit, and it has to be upheld by the Supreme Court. If it's not, if the Supreme Court does not uphold that federal judge's ruling, they're basically going to be saying the Constitution is done. That the President of the United States now has no limitations on him whatsoever. He can do anything he wants. He's doing that pretty much anyway. But can you imagine what would it be like if the Supreme Court says, yeah, it's okay for you to totally violate the Constitution, for you to make new laws, decide which ones to enforce and which ones not to. All of that's just fine. As I see it at that point, we're done as a constitutional republic. And that's the point where the states are going to have to, again, do something. Legislatures around the country are introducing legislation to do things like throw out concealed weapons permits, allow open carry. Here in Texas, it's very important. It's very important they allow open carry in Texas. It's very important they allow students to carry weapons on college campuses. I am so tired of gun-free zones and seeing people get killed in gun-free zones. That's where it happens, 90% of the time. That's why it happened at Fort Hood, because our military bases were made gun-free zones by President Clinton. Only the MPs are allowed to carry weapons. We're the only country in the world that does that. And there have been 2 massacres at Fort Hood now as a result of it. Where are most of the terrorist attacks taking place? Malls, where they're gun-free zones. Schools, which are gun-free zones. Universities, which are gun-free zones. Some of the states have had legislation introduced basically saying that no more gun-free zones in our state, period. And the federal government can't tell us we have to have gun-free zones. So we need to talk to our legislators here, and you need to talk to the local sheriff here, and get your friends in other parts of Texas and other states to talk to the local sheriff. Get them to go on a website, or they can go directly to the Constitutional Sheriff and Peace Officers Association website. sign that declaration, become a part of that group, vow that you will not allow tyranny in your county. The more we vow that, the more our elected officials take that vow, the more we take that vow, the less powerful and less successful they're going to be when they actually try to do it to us. And I'm talking about the federal government completely taking away our rights. We don't have that many left. I mean, they're trying to, take over the internet now. The bastion of free speech for conservative movement is the internet. We're certainly not going to get anything on NBC. They're not even going to talk about a lot of things. They're going right along with the president saying that, there is no such thing as Islamic terrorism. My oldest boy spent 94 months in combat since 9/11. Don't tell him there's no such thing. He fought the Taliban 4 times in Afghanistan. He fought the Sunnis in Iraq. He was even in Pakistan at one point. But we don't talk about that because he wasn't supposed to be there. But he can tell you who we're fighting. And the idea that the Taliban is not a terrorist organization. Why did we go into Afghanistan in the first place? Because that's where Al-Qaeda was based. That's where their headquarters was. That's where their training camps were. They were in there training people to kill Americans, and we're doing it. So we went in and we kicked out the Taliban. Now Obama's going to let them right back in again. That void that he left in Iraq, we see what's happening there. It's been filled up by Islamic terrorists. But don't despair. Remember, Obama told us just before the 2012 election that he had personally wiped out Al-Qaeda, that we had nothing to fear. Somebody showed me a cartoon the other day that says, if Obama is alone in a forest, it says something when nobody's around, will it still be a lie? I think that's a pretty good question, because that's all he does. I mean, that's all the man does. He lies to the point where he lies when it's to his advantage to tell the truth. But we're getting now to the point where he's committing treason.
Amen.
And my latest article on my blog, and I encourage people to read this, we're getting a big response to this thing. It's entitled Aid and Comfort. And I point out that in the Constitution, the definition of treason includes providing aid and comfort to the enemy. It doesn't have to be direct aid. It can just be support, directly or indirectly. And I list in there 16 things that the President of the United States has done to provide aid and comfort to our enemies. The latest being yesterday. I'm a former military officer. There's a lot of ex-military out there, I know. And all of us know one thing from the military. One particular point of strategy and tactics. You don't send a note to your enemy saying, we're going to attack you here tomorrow. And we're going to use these forces. Obama did that yesterday when the Pentagon put out what we're going to do in May in Mosul. We're going to attack you, here's who's going to attack you, here's how we're going to attack you. I don't think the Iraqi army is going to go. Now, if I was them, I would say, the heck with this. You just told them where we're coming. The sorties we're flying against the ISIS. Experts say that we are to be effective, the military to have an effective campaign in the air, and just the air was not going to do it. But we need to be flying 240 a day, sorties against the enemy. We're averaging 24 a day. Last week, there was one day we did 2. And from what I'm hearing from my sources in the military, Obama and his people are micromanaging the attacks. Every target has to be approved by Obama or one of his appointees, none of whom are in the military, have ever been in the military. So you know what we're doing? We're bombing a lot of empty buildings at night. We're blowing up a lot of parked pickup trucks. He didn't want to hurt anybody. He didn't want to kill the people who are trying to kill us. But they've come up with a solution. They're going to parachute in jobs. B-52s will just drop parachutes with jobs. It's getting tough out there, ladies and gentlemen. But we need to push our states and our local governments to stop violating the Constitution, because many of them are doing it just as much as the federal government. We need to elect people who will stand up and say enough is enough. And yes, we will not do what you're telling us we have to do. We will not allow you to even tell us. Cite the Constitution. Read the Constitution. That little booklet of mine, you know, people take it or carry it around all the time. A lot of people order it for schools and churches to give out. And, you know, I carry around a pretty beat up copy because I found out that it's very good. If you're arguing with a liberal and they say something stupid, you can either point out what's in the Constitution or you just whack them with it. It's important that we get more meetings like this going, we get more people. I'm going around speaking. I've got speaking engagements just piling up now. Been all over the country doing them. And if you have an organization you want me to speak to, I've spoken to the Rotary Club here in Tyler. I've spoken to Lions clubs, Tea Party groups, Republican groups. And so I'm willing to keep doing that because we got to get the word out. So many people out there don't know what's going on. If they don't know what their rights are, they're not going to know when they're losing them. And that's what we're facing. Our kids aren't being taught about the Constitution. They're not being taught about the Declaration of Independence. In North Carolina, yeah, it was a North Carolina school. They had a school here recently where all the children were forced to recite the Pledge of Allegiance in Arabic and say, "One nation under Allah."
Unreal.
You know, that in Texas here, some girls were forced to wear burqas to class one day. I mean, nobody's talking about what is really out there, what Sharia law really is. And that's something else we need to nullify, nip it in the bud. This state needs to follow what Oklahoma's done. If we have to amend our Constitution, let's amend our Constitution and say no Sharia law under any circumstances. And the legislature needs to outlaw that tribunal that they've just set up for Sharia law. Because if you don't know what Sharia law is, let me tell you, first of all, there's no rights for women. Under Sharia law, a man cannot be convicted of killing his wife or his daughters if it's an honor killing, if they've done something to embarrass him. And the honor killing we had here in Texas a few years ago, 2 girls were killed because they were wearing Western clothing. And the father said, that's an honor killing. Now this tribunal says it's not going to be doing criminal law. Well, let's wait and see. But civil law, if you are a non-Muslim, an infidel, and by the way, I just bought a t-shirt that says armed infidel. I'm pushing the envelope here a little bit. But if you are an infidel and you have a contract with a Muslim, and that contract says that any breach of contract or any dispute must be resolved under Sharia law, then you would have to go to this tribunal. But let me tell you what happens when you go on that tribunal. It is automatically assumed that as an infidel, you lie about everything. So it doesn't matter what you testify to, you're going to lose. That's Sharia law. Now, we've had legislation pending in the House of Representatives, signed by 83 female members of Congress, pending since 2009. And it's never been brought up for a vote. And it basically outlaws Sharia law in federal courts in this country. Because I don't trust Eric Holder. And by the way, what I'm finding out about this new appointee, Loretta Lynch, I think it is, you know, she's going to be worse than Holder if she's not in jail by the time the appointment goes through, because she's under criminal investigation right now. But my fear is that they'll just start allowing Sharia law. I mean, look what happened in Oklahoma. 70% of the people of Oklahoma voted to amend their constitution to outlaw Sharia law and Sharia courts. They were sued by a Muslim involved with CARE, which, by the way, is a front for Hamas. And joining in that lawsuit was Eric Holder in the Justice Department. Again, we need to nullify this sort of thing. We need to do it through our state legislatures. We need to do it through our courts. If you're sitting on a jury and you're seeing somebody's constitutional rights being violated, you need to vote to acquit that person. That's what jury nullification is all about. More importantly, in a civil case, if you see injustice being done by the courts, then you need to vote the way your conscience is telling you to vote, not necessarily how the judge tells you you have to vote because this is the law. Because the law is us. We are the law. The Declaration of Independence says it, that we are the ultimate judges, the ultimate arbitrators of what goes on in this country and what doesn't go on in this country. We're the ones who decide how we live our lives and how we let other people live theirs. The Declaration simply says that we have the right to alter or change our form of government. People are talking about, we need a constitutional convention, rewrite the Constitution, that sort of thing. There's nothing wrong with the Constitution. The Constitution says what we want it to say. But when you don't enforce the Constitution, when nobody pays attention to the Constitution, when they think they can alter it, courts can alter it with a stroke of the pen. Obama can do it with a stroke of the pen. Then that's when we're in trouble. And that's when we need to take a serious look at what our next steps are going to be. So I've read along enough. I'll answer some questions now.